Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sully's Open Conversation, the show that aims to have an unfamiliar conversation in a familiar environment. Today I have taken the trip down to Whitstable to come and meet with Chris.
Hi
Welcome,
George.
Chris. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's not too bad, the weather.
Yeah,
a bit
the
drizzly,
rain-
but it's actually getting milder, so that's good.
It's just holding off, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we've also, of course, got Cooper joining
Cooper.
us as well.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very
Good.
well, thank you, very well. So me and Chris met each other, we were actually just on the call, wasn't it? Working both in mental health
yeah.
and suicide
Yeah.
prevention. But I'll let Chris introduce himself.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name's Chris Murray. Where to start? This is probably the most difficult bit, yeah. Personally, I have experience of being suicidal, which was back in 2016, after about 20 years previous to that, with poor mental health. Up until that point, I was told, because I was taken to the hospital twice by ambulance in 48 hours in July 2016, that after being held in a padded room, seen by numerous mental health and psychiatrists and doctors, that the previous diagnosis I'd had of depression was just a sticking plaster and counselling. Since then diagnosed with clinical depression, anxiety and OCD. My OCD type is the kind of the check-in and control, and also I have been having regular reviews, and I just had one yesterday around my bipolar type 2 and the medication I'm taking for that to balance my mood and help stabilise my mood. So since then I work within government, and I've also set up my own private business as well, so as a mental health, suicide first aid consultancy and training business, so work across all sectors, train people, mental health first aid within government too, and done a lot really. I've moved kind of a lot more into the diversity and inclusion space.
Amazing.
So around protected characteristics as part of the Quality Act, and diversity, equity and quality as well as part of that. My kind of passion's a bit about me, which I think is part of my story around my mental health conditions, where I am a sociable person. I like to go out a lot, and up until 2016 I was very private about that. So the instances where I would make excuses not to go somewhere, or I would leave people on a night out and not tell them and just disappear, and part of that was because I started to feel overwhelmed, my anxiety, I felt like I was going to have a panic attack sometimes. So, and that really has kind of impacted me since 2016, where I think one of the positives is that now people know kind of the seriousness, and people close to me, friends and family, have an better understanding around mental health and how to support me, so that I feel like I've been honest and open of times when I don't feel comfortable doing something. And that's one of the reasons I have Cooper. Cooper, you're going to say hello? Up.
Aww.
Up.
Here he
Cooper.
is. Bless him.
He's 3 in June, but one of the reasons I got him was to help with my anxiety, especially in
kind of a
public
therapy
spaces.
dog.
Yeah. So I think kind of my apart from it being generalised anxiety disorder, I was diagnosed with social phobia and agoraphobia, 2 kind of traits within that. And busy spaces, crowded spaces, which being a social person again can sometimes be difficult, but having him helps massively, and also driving as well. And then so apart from animals and dogs, music, I like music. Support Middlesbrough Football Club, fingers crossed we get promoted. Like going out to see friends, families. I love travelling, which some people say is weird with my conditions. How can you enjoy travelling if it's something that
could flare up?
Yeah, I mean, going somewhere new I find exciting. That's not a trigger for me. It can be for some people, on agoraphobia, being in somewhere that's unfamiliar, and social phobias. But for me, I enjoy going new places, seeing new places, travelling. It's more the intensity of kind of how busy or crowded somewhere might
space
be,
is, yeah.
and what control I have over that, depending on how I'm feeling at the time. So yeah, that's
amazing.
That's me.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
that was probably a long introduction.
No, it's absolutely incredible. So you've kind of covered a little bit of your experiences with mental health and mental illness. Where did that kind of first start for you? When did that become quite apparent that mentally you were not in a great place?
It started around the age of 17, 18 for me. And one of the things I remember when I was in 2016, when I was taken to the hospital, as I do with a lot of people that, for diagnosis, try and look for what's triggered it. So, right from, did you have a traumatic birth? Have you had a good upbringing, a good home life? Were you bullied at school? It's trying to look for a trigger like that.
Yeah.
And I think kind of 17, 18, I think, going into early adulthood and into the workplace, I think I started to develop some symptoms which weren't really apparent at the time, but I think then what kind of brought them to a head was bullying and discrimination that I faced because of my age in the workplace by a manager. And that was kind of the first period where I started to question myself and doubt myself. Why was I being treated differently, spoken down to, discriminated against because of my age? And that really kind of then knocked my confidence. And I think that has been, I wouldn't say a massive trigger kind of going forward from then, but I think that was kind of the first instance that I...
Where you noticed that was really affecting you.
Yeah, and maybe I'm failing, I'm doing something wrong. When ultimately it transpired that this person kind of had a bit of a history of bullying harassing staff, things like that. So, it's, it wasn't me, but I think that's been a little bit of a part of in the back of my mind that when I've had other experiences that I've felt like maybe it is me, I'm to blame, I'm at fault, I'm a failure, which is kind of in the common thing, and it's for people who, from my own experience and other people who feel suicidal or make plans to end their life, that's quite a common thing, that people feel like they're a failure, people will be better off without them, that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you almost try and convince yourself that it is you that's the problem.
Yeah.
And in more and more conversations, and there's a fantastic, I think he's about 18 now, Charlie, but he's on the advisory board, and I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name, but he's on the advisory board for the Ollie Foundation, so the One Life Lost is enough. And he says that suicide and suicidal feelings and people it's a people problem. So it's not actually just to do with the individual. We can't just look at the individual, because it's not the individual that's just the problem. It's actually the society and the environment in which they've grown up in or been surrounded by that has impacted them to feel that way as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely some of the pressures of expectation. I guess maybe on your upbringing, your religion as well might play a part in terms of expectations and things around careers you should go into and the life you should lead. But I think also, the day and age we're in now, social media, where I think especially for young people, it's a huge pressure.
And interestingly enough, actually, so I was at a conference last week with Ian Russell, who lost his daughter Molly, and there was obviously a very high-profile court case about social media and the dangers of sharing things like self-harming content, and that's what social media and our children are can potentially be exposed to. And it really shone a light on the fact that there is no regulation in that department. Children could be consuming any kind of content. Their parents may not know what that is, yet things like TikTok, Instagram, there are so many people on that platform, and there are such a wide variety of content that they're not aware, and certainly I wouldn't have been aware at that age as well, kind of 14, 15, 16, how that content could affect me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just kind of what people are exposed to, but I think it's, the pressures. I think there's still that pressure to look a certain way, have certain clothes, that kind of thing. And, if someone has a perception that you don't fit the mould, or, there's something about you that they don't like, that they feel they have a right to say it. So, trolling and online abuse can really impact on somebody's mental health. And even though it's somebody you don't know most of the time, and, might not even have a profile picture, but that one negative comment, it's like, we might get 20 positives, but it's the one negative thing that we get or we feel about ourselves that we focus on. So you might have achieved loads in a day at work and think, oh, there's that one thing I didn't do, and that might prey on your mind. We are very, have a negative perspective often in terms of what we're doing.
And certainly figuring out myself a little bit more, and the way that I am a little bit of a perfectionist, that can really play on your mind, in the sense that you may have done an amazing interview or amazing piece of work, but you focus on that one thing that you could have done better, and it's always striving for more, and that then leads to dissatisfaction or not feeling fully satisfied, and again that affects your mental health.
Totally. I mean, when I started therapy with a psychiatrist after 2016, that was one of the themes where, you know, looking at positives, and as part of, I've forgotten what it was called now, some of the things we were discussing, and very much that I was saying, but if I achieve, you know, out of 10, if I got a 10 on something, it'd be like, but there's still something there. I'd be always looking for what else I could do. Similar things when I've done talks and presentations and shared my story and things like that. I mean, one of the things I've learned is that, you know, the audience doesn't know what you're going to say. So if you forget to say something, don't beat yourself up. But it took me a while, because I kind of go out and I think, oh, I completely forgot to mention those points.
That's
like I probably will
exactly
after this.
Yeah.
I'll be driving back home and I'll be like,
Why
I
did I
really
say
wanted
that?
to say that and I didn't. George.
Can we do it again?
Yeah.
Yeah, I look back on it a lot, and especially with interview, like similarly with this, when I do my own interviews and stuff, and I look back and I'm like, why didn't I say that? But like, it's never crossed my mind, and you've just mentioned it, that actually they don't know that you were going to say that. So actually, it's only you that's beating yourself up about it, that you haven't said it.
Yeah, and that's the same around mental health. I'm sure that, you know, many people have felt like this. I know lots of people I spoke to, and my own experience again leading up to being suicidal, and kind of periods of poor mental health in the 20 years previous, where I remember walking around the office, being out in public, and everybody else, because you can't read minds, but apart from physical disabilities, you know, it's why mental health is often referred to as like invisible disability, because I remember walking around thinking, I can't tell if anybody else is
feeling this way,
is having these suicides. I must be the only one in the world feeling and thinking like this, that I don't want to be here, I'm not good enough, I don't plan to be here anymore. Yeah, and that can often be one of the difficulties, I think, for some people, in how, one, they open up, reach out for help and support, but also how other people recognise, because, you know, we all say, hey, how are you? Yeah, I'm fine.
it's
Yeah,
so
but are you
generic
fine?
now, isn't it? Yeah. There
And
needs to be more intrusive conversation. Intrusive is the wrong word, but you need to dig to a deeper level, because it's so easy to just bat off and say, yeah, I'm fine, how are you, kind of thing. But I have found that second how are you, like, no, actually, how are you really feeling, does offer that just that slightly different twist to it that makes someone think a little bit deeper.
It shows that you're actually interested in their well-being. Change the tone, ask again. It's like, oh, they've maybe recognised my behaviour or my mood has changed. I mean, one of the things that I do now, which gradually as more and more people do, it becomes, acceptable is not the word, but when people ask me now, how are you? I say, well, actually, and it's kind of a bit like, oh God, I just thought you were going to say you're fine, kind of thing. But
it throws them off a little bit as well. Actually,
I think it also encourages other people to say, oh, do you know what? Because, you know, people always think, oh yeah, my problem, I don't want to bother you with my problems, but I guess it's that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
100%, definitely. So what, in terms of your experiences, obviously in contact with the mental health services in the country and stuff, would you mind talking a little bit about what happened and your experiences and kind of what led you into doing the work that you do now?
Yeah, so I think first of all, in terms of the services, I think we all know that it needs investment right across the board in terms of healthcare, physical, mental health and well-being, end-to-end journey, and into social care, you know. But I think one of the things that needs to kind of underpin that is the training and support that those health professionals are getting. From my experience, I've had people in the health and mental health sector say things like, what have you got to be depressed about? People will miss you if you weren't here. And kind of some of the language that's been used isn't helpful, and can just make somebody feel a lot worse, I think. And I know I've mentioned this to you before, my biggest bugbear about when anyone talks about mental health is when they say mental health problem. We don't say you've got a physical problem, we say it's an illness, a condition, an injury. It's a mental health condition, mental health illness. That's not to say, and I think the biggest stigma around mental health is when we talk about mental health, people immediately think you have an illness or condition.
Mental illness, they
but
do.
People have positive mental health as well, same as our physical health. It's a spectrum, goes hand in hand with each other, and it impacts on each other. You know, so physical injury might mean we can't drive to work, play footy with our mates on the weekend. You get stuck in the house a bit more. How does that impact your mental illness? And vice versa, and your mental illness, what might that do to your physical health? You might, you know, be diagnosed with severe depression, so you can't go for a run. You might start drinking more, which might fuel your depression further, eating poorly. So it definitely goes hand in hand.
And I think that's a lot of what I've been stressing and have realised, especially the kind of corporate environment with mental health. Like you say, when someone says mental health, they automatically think of it in a negative light. But like you say, mental health is like physical health. It can be good and bad. It's a spectrum. You can move from, I don't know, mental health. You could move from a 9 out of 10, and then in the middle of the day you might be a 4 out of 10, and then you might go back up to an 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
That's what mental health is, but mental illness is diagnosed conditions and disorders. And I think that's what is difficult for people to understand, or is the information that they've been fed is that just mental health just means that. So when someone says like, oh, they have mental health, they're basically saying they are having mental health challenges, but they think just saying, oh, they have mental health is just saying, oh, they're not in a great place.
And
whereas
I think
it could be positive as well.
and people might have poor mental health but might not ever get a diagnosis, because partly because of stigma around it. They might not want to feel open up, especially men, who we know in terms of suicide rates, 3 out of every 4 suicides are men, and globally 1 man dies every minute by suicide. But I think in terms of poor mental health, sometimes people might recognise, especially if they've had previous experience, or in terms of their self-care and resilience, it's quite good. So they might recognise that their mental health is deteriorating, but actually then start to make changes to improve that. So, for example, exercise, talking therapies, asking for help, reducing alcohol intake. So it might not necessarily mean they get to diagnose if they recognise those signs.
So what did your recovery path look like? How did you begin to improve? Obviously, you were in a very, very dark place. So what were the steps that allowed you to kind of come out of that and then be able to then focus on improving and managing it better?
The first thing, I think, and everyone will have probably heard, it's okay not to be okay. Up until 2016, in my head, it wasn't okay not to be okay. And kind of for me, at that point, I'd been taken into hospital by ambulance and then released, and then taken back in, and friends coming in with me and having discussions while I was in the room about, do I need to be sectioned, do I need to be kept in, and then put on crisis watch, and then my parents came and got me, and ended up going back so they could kind of watch me, look after me. And that was a whole, I think once everybody found out, and I was getting messages, and it was kind of trickled down, somebody told somebody, and I didn't turn up for things. It was like a massive weight lift on my shoulders, and I remember feeling I don't care anymore. I don't care, because it's actually a lot of energy goes into hiding stuff and keeping that private, and it's exhausting. It really is, especially when you get to crisis. And I remember I'd made kind of a plan, because it was the day after my birthday, and I'd made the plan this was going to happen after my birthday. And the night before, I was drinking heavily, and because of what I planned to do, I was kind of self-sabotaging, and what I've later found out from therapy, almost self-harming intentionally on myself, where I was being rude and abusive to friends who'd come out for my birthday. People were, I think afterwards, some people had just dismissed it as, maybe he's just had a bit too much to drink, he's been stupid, we know he's not like this all the time. But I was intentionally pushing away friends and my partner and other people, because I felt alone, and wasn't. But if I knew that I had pushed everybody away, it was going to make it a hell of a lot easier for me to do what I intended to do, and for people not to feel bad about me not being here, if that makes sense.
And I think that's a really, really crucial point to highlight, that self-harm and self-sabotage doesn't have to just be a physical act. Self-harm could be like pushing friends away. It could be wanting to isolate yourself, because that's the direction that you're going through. If you're feeling suicidal, then the easiest thing for you to do would just to be left alone, and then do what you thought you wanted to do.
And because I didn't feel like I was worthy of living anymore, because I felt like a failure, I wanted them to hurt me. So in terms of what I was trying to instigate and push them away and push them physically out of my way, I was like, and that sometimes can be a trick if we think about kind of what I mentioned about the statistics around men. Men are much more likely to drink alcohol, might get involved in a fight. Sometimes that might not necessarily be, through wanting to start a fight, but through maybe a condition. There might
Yeah.
be signs and symptoms and a trigger there in terms of that self-harm. But then when you think about kind of the prison service as well, supporting or maybe need to do more to support people, not just men, in terms of mental health and how they assess people when they go in and how they support people when they come out after they serve their sentence too.
Yeah, and I think not to compare, but obviously the prison service, you get people that reoffend because there
Yeah.
isn't much support
Yeah.
out there for them to find their feet again. And similarly, that happens in the mental health services as well. People are discharged, and sometimes there was a guy on it last week that worked on a ward at a men's mental health hospital, and he was saying some of them aren't mentally ill; they're just reoffending because it's a place
Yeah.
to stay, it's a safer place to be, rather than if they were homeless or on the
Yeah.
street or between kind of accommodations. So it's about finding the right care
Yeah.
for the patient, of course. But again, there are obviously diagnoses. I think actually at the moment when I was in hospital, I was diagnosed with EUPD, so borderline personality disorder. But they're now potentially discussing about getting rid of that diagnosis because it's too complicated to try and highlight or understand, and there's a lot of overlap with different disorders and conditions
Yeah.
that come with the borderline personality
Yeah.
disorder diagnosis.
And I think that, I mean, the two things I was going to mention about homelessness, but on diagnosis as well, a lot of people don't realise it's quite common to have more than one mental health condition.
Yeah.
And whichever one presents itself as being more prevalent at the time you seek support, or the symptoms you may display might mean, and kind of, I know in my case, from speaking with psychiatrists when I went to hospital, that I'd only ever been diagnosed with periods of mild to moderate, and I think on one occasion severe depression. But actually, you know, like I said, anxiety, OCD, as well as kind of bipolar tendencies as well. And I think the other thing I was going to mention about, because you touched on the homeless people there, I mean, that's another area where I think it's 85% plus men that are on the street. A lot of people, I think, don't appreciate that. Again, mental health has led to a lot of people being on the street, as well as people who are LGBTQ plus as well. A lot of young people in that protected characteristic, but a lot of them for mental health, where they might have turned to alcohol,
Yeah.
or got into debt, lost their job, lost their family, lost their home, and they end up on the street and end up without a job. And then what's their coping mechanism? Well, it's quite often coping mechanism a lot of us use, turn to alcohol and other things.
Yeah, and what you don't realise, especially if your mental health is deteriorating already, is that is compounding on it.
Yeah.
I remember kind of when I was going downhill, I was using alcohol and drugs because it was allowing me to escape those negative thoughts.
Yeah.
But what I didn't realise it was doing was making it worse for me.
Yeah.
And of course, that then snowballs, and obviously you're just going to end up deteriorating further and faster.
Yeah, I mean, I've over the years, even since diagnosis, but a lot more pre, one of the things I remember doing quite often was, especially when I was having a drink, I mentioned already about maybe disappearing on a night out, or just going home, getting a taxi on my own. I always used to get the taxi to drop me off 10 minutes plus walk, or I'd get off a tube stop one before I needed to, because of how I felt, how emotional I was, and really let those emotions out, cry, walk home. Partly because when I got home, I didn't want anybody to know, and I felt it building up, and obviously again with alcohol being a depressant, triggering my mood on most occasions as well. But depending on the situation and circumstances which I'd left and how I felt, I would quite often do that because I thought I need some space to be alone.
Yeah,
to kind of get it out.
And to be fair, it's kind of, in a way, it's good that you gave that time and space to yourself, although you may not have been in the best place, but providing yourself with some space and some time to just kind of let it out, rather than just going back home trying to forget about it. Because again, we both know that trying to avoid it and suppress it and just disregard what's going on internally can exponentially make it worse as well.
I can recall a few times where I've been in a taxi and I'm about to have a panic attack, hurry up, and then kind of almost holding it all in and the emotion, and then the minute I get out of the taxi, kind of just more or less exploding.
It's exploding, yeah. Wow. So should we talk a little bit about your work that you're doing now?
Yeah.
And yeah, how you got into that, why you got into that is self-explanatory, but what you're doing at the moment, I suppose. And
Yeah, I mean, it all started with kind of my main day job where, so 2017, I said, I think we need to do some more, because everybody at that point obviously knew, as I said, so I kind of started to say to work in HR, can we do some more around mental health awareness? I looked at the mental health policy, I started to get involved in work in that area, and then it kind of first came around where, as I started to make some recommendations and get involved in the mental health agenda and that area of work in the workplace, first of all, where somebody, one of the senior managers said, it'd be good if you could share your story and do a bit of awareness and see how receptive people are as a starting point. And that was a bit overwhelming. I'm used to speaking in front of people anyway. And what's weird is, I think, I used to sometimes, like everybody, you get maybe a bit of butterflies, a bit of nervousness, public speaking. I used to just get a little bit of that, but since sharing my story, apart from after the first few times, it's kind of, that's one of my anxieties has gone, which is kind of funny, because I now do it so much, talking in front of people.
And actually sharing such personal story, I mean, it's the most vulnerable you can almost be in a way. So actually, if you're able to do that, then a lot of it seems a lot, not easier, but kind of a lot more relaxed, I suppose.
Yeah. And I remember kind of umming and ahhing and thinking, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I thought, okay, I'll do it. And I remember a few people saying to me, focus on yourself, you still need to focus on getting back to being yourself, you're still getting support and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, it might help me to talk about it. And every single time I've done anything around awareness, training, telling my story, talks at conferences, in public, whatever it is, I've always had people contacting me or coming up to me afterwards and saying, apart from thank you, but I'm going to get help, or I think I might have had a condition, or I haven't told somebody about what I'm going through, and not asking for advice, but almost giving them the confidence. So I think after that first initial time, I thought, actually, if I do this and I help someone, I save someone else, then it's worth doing. And then it snowballed from there, really, where I think it was then later that year, 2017-18, where people were saying to me, you should do this and work with more people. So I became a mental health first aid instructor a couple of years ago, suicide first aid instructor. So again, working with private, public, voluntary sector, working with them on their people and wellbeing strategies, policies, communications, engagement, all that, and helping to advise and support them on, staff wellbeing overall and delivering training for them. So, and that's something I'm really passionate about, as well as I mentioned men's health. So I'm an ambassador for the November Foundation, and obviously, I know kind of you're involved back in the Hope, so I'm also kind of a supporter volunteer with them too. So yeah, really passionate.
Amazing stuff. Amazing. It's obviously very essential, the work that you're doing, and thank you so much. And you've obviously mentioned a little bit about Dean Russell, who is currently trying to make it a law that there has to be someone mental health first trained in every workplace in the UK, isn't
So
it?
he represented his bill, I think it was the 25th of January, to basically make mental health first aid a legal requirement in the workplace.
So hopefully that bill gets passed. There are obviously concerns about, is that just ticking a box? What do you think in terms of that, actually?
I think so. Again, some of the organisations I've worked with, and I've gone and done kind of initial awareness or presentation to like chief executives, boards of companies, directors, and things, and got them involved in the conversation, because I think some of the resistance to it has always been a little bit around. But we don't want to make people counsellors because they're not. That's not the qualification. But sometimes the danger of people thinking that they're there to counsel people, and that's not part of the role. But it having the same, what the word is, but the same kind of priorities with physical first aid.
Yes,
You're there to provide
there's
initial help,
there's resources,
support, keep someone safe, and help them get that support so that they are safe.
Amazing. It's starting to rain a little bit heavier now, so we'll just about wrap up. It's been an absolutely lovely conversation, Chris, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So the last thing we like to do is, if there is one particular mindful technique that you employ that you think others could try and maybe enjoy, then what would that be?
Get a dog or a pet.
I'm working on it.
And any pets that you can cuddle and stroke, really good for releasing endorphins and serotonin, you know, that boosts our mood, makes us feel, you know, warm, fuzzy, oxytocin, and other chemicals that help us. If you can get one like a dog, which obviously then gets you out in the rain, all weathers, then you're getting physical exercise too, which again is good for you, for boosting those mood enhancing chemicals. The other thing I would say is, again, I know we're by the beach, but I love the sound of running water, waves and
So
waterfalls
therapeutic,
especially.
isn't it?
I like, you know, again, thunderstorms and rain on the window pane too, but what I usually say on night, and I do it more often than not, so the last few weeks I've had it on, is I usually say, Alexa, play Sounds of the Seaside. And then I just, once it starts playing, I say turn it off in an hour, and I've usually drifted off because it helps me focus, because then I close my eyes, feel like I'm just laid by the beach, and it's so relaxing.
Soothing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's incredibly soothing, and
Yeah.
it does. There's definitely a word for it. I can't remember what it is, but there's something that just like, it's just really kind of. There's a feeling in your head that's just like incredibly soothing, and it just
It relaxes you. I mean, I love that feeling when you're on holiday in the pool or a beach and you're on a lilo, and that rocking
floating,
motion as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
And usually when I go to bed on the night, if I've been on holiday and done that, I can usually feel a little bit like I'm rocking.
Yeah, I
and
know
that
what you
kind of
mean.
brings us back to kind of our childhood and youth of being like
Of course,
cradled as a
being rocked
baby
in comfort
and feeling safe. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then the only other thing I've kind of added is talk to people. Again,
Yeah,
we've
very
talked about,
important.
ask twice, it's okay not to be okay. But you'd be amazed how receptive people are and how much support is out there to people.
Amazing stuff. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks for having me, George.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time on Sully's Open Conversation. Goodbye.